The Gift of Shadows. In the small, forgotten village of Ironswell, nestled deep in the mist-shrouded valley, lived a mother named Lila with her 3 children, Sienna, Elias, and young Rowan. Their cottage, a humble structure of timber and thatch, stood at the edge of the village, where the shadows seemed darker and the air felt heavier. It was a place where stories lived, stories of a time when the village was thriving, when it was known for its vibrant markets, and when children ran through the streets playing games. But now, all that remained were the cold whispers of a past that had long faded away and the lingering uncertainty of what the future would bring. Lila, though young in heart and spirit, had known hardship all her life. Widowed when Rowan was just a baby, she carried the burden of raising her children alone, without so much as a whisper of help. The village had once been full of laughter and life, but now it was as quiet as a graveyard. The once lush fields were barren, and the well that had once supplied water to the villagers was now dry, a forgotten relic. The villagers grew more desperate with each passing year, their crops failing, their homes crumbling, and their hope withering like the once great trees that bordered their land. But Lila's love for her children was unwavering. Every day, she worked tirelessly, sewing, cooking, cleaning, doing whatever she could to keep her family together. Despite their dire circumstances, she never allowed herself to show her children the extent of her struggles. She smiled, always, even when there was nothing left to smile about. One cold afternoon, as winter's chill began to creep into the air, a surprising event occurred. The village, desperate as it was, had come to a standstill. No one dared to speak of the strange things happening at night, the noises that echoed from the forest, the shadows that moved on their own, and the faint whispers in the wind. Some said it was the spirits of the past, angry and restless. Others believed it was something darker, something far more sinister. But it was the hunger that truly gripped the hearts of the villagers. With no food to sustain them, they watched as their strength slowly faded away. It was on one such afternoon, when the air was particularly still and the sky a pale shade of gray, that Lila returned from the village square, a small piece of bread in her hand. The bread, though meager, was enough to feed her and her children for a day. It had been given to her by the baker, a man who had once been a friend of her late husband. He, too, was struggling, but he had seen Lila's hardships and decided to give her what little he could spare. Lila stared at the bread in her hand, torn between her own hunger and the needs of her children. They were so young, so full of life. They needed it more than she did. Without a second thought, she broke the bread into 3 pieces and handed it to Sienna, Elias, and Rowan. She smiled, hiding the pang of hunger gnawing at her own stomach.
"Eat my
loves," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. As the children devoured their portions, Lila sat back against the wall, her stomach aching with emptiness. She had given them everything she had, and still, she felt a strange sense of contentment. She had done what a mother should. She had sacrificed. That night, the air felt heavier. The winds howled through the trees, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the village. But it wasn't just the wind that stirred the darkness. It was something else. The next morning, the village awoke to a strange sight. Outside Lila's cottage, a small basket of food had appeared, placed carefully on the doorstep. There were fruits, vegetables, and even a loaf of bread, fresh, warm, and untouched. It was as if it had been placed there by invisible hands. Lila, astonished, looked around. There was no one in sight. She picked up the basket, her heart racing with a mixture of wonder and fear. Who could have left this for her?
and why?
The mystery deepened when, day after day, the same thing happened. A basket would appear on her doorstep, filled with food. Always just what she needed, never too much or too little. The villagers, noticing Lila's good fortune, began to gossip. Some believed that the food came from the spirits of the forest as a reward for her kindness. Others thought it was a miracle, a gift from the gods themselves. But Lila didn't care for the rumors. All she cared about was that her children were fed, that they had hope, and that they could sleep through the night without hunger gnawing at their insides. But as the days passed, Lila's contentment turned to suspicion. She had never been one to believe in magic or supernatural forces, but the strange gifts that appeared on her doorstep could not be explained. There were no footsteps leading to her door, no signs of anyone in the area. And yet, the baskets kept coming. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows began to stretch across the land, Lila decided to take matters into her own hands. She would discover the truth behind the mysterious gifts. That night, as the wind whistled through the trees and the moon cast its pale light on the village, Lila sat by her window, watching, waiting. Hours passed, and the world outside grew quiet. But then, just as she had begun to drift into a restless sleep, she heard something, a soft rustling in the bushes outside her cottage. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she crept toward the door, opening it just a crack. And that's when she saw it. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood just beyond the tree line. It was tall, almost unnatural in its proportions, and its face was hidden beneath the folds of its cloak. For a moment, Lila felt her breath catch in her throat. Was it a spirit? A ghost of the past? But then the figure stepped forward, its footfall barely making a sound, and it placed a basket on the doorstep. The figure turned and, without a word, disappeared back into the darkness. Lila rushed outside, her mind racing. She couldn't explain what she had seen, but she knew one thing. The figure was real, and it wasn't done yet. The next day, Lila followed the figure's trail through the forest, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to discover the truth. The path twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the woods than she had ever ventured before. The air grew thick, the shadows darker, and a sense of dread began to settle over her. But she pressed on, determined to find the answers. Eventually, she came upon a clearing where the moonlight shone down in brilliant beams. And in the center of the clearing stood the figure. Its cloak was open now, revealing its true form. It was not human, it was something else, something ancient. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its skin was as pale as death. The creature tilted its head, as if it had been expecting her. "Why are you doing this?" Lila demanded, her voice trembling with fear and resolve. "What do you want from me?" The creature's voice was like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "I am the keeper of the forest, and I have seen your sacrifice," it said. "Your kindness has not gone unnoticed." Lila's heart raced. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" The creature stepped closer, its eyes never leaving hers. "I have been watching you, Lila. You are a mother who knows the true meaning of sacrifice. You have given everything for your children. In return, I offer you this, the gift of abundance. You will never go hungry again, as long as you give freely of your heart." Lila's mind spun. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or fearful, but the creature's gaze held her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her. "But I don't understand," she whispered. "What must I do?" The creature smiled, its teeth sharp and white. "Nothing. Simply continue to live as you have. The food will come, as it always has. But remember this, you must never forget the value of sacrifice. It is the greatest gift you can give." And with that, the creature turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Lila standing alone in the clearing. As she made her way back to her cottage, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The mystery had been solved, but there was more to it than she had ever realized. She had learned that true sacrifice was not just about giving up what you had, it was about giving without expecting anything in return. It was about love and the quiet strength that comes from putting others before yourself. The days that followed were filled with a quiet kind of magic. The baskets of food continued to appear on Lila's doorstep, but now she knew the source. And though she never saw the figure again, she often felt its presence, a silent guardian watching over her and her children. In the end, the village of Ironswell began to change. Slowly but surely, the land began to heal. The crops grew once more, the well filled with water, and the shadows that had plagued the village seemed to recede. Lila's children grew strong and healthy, and they never went hungry again. And though the village would never return to its former glory, it had found something more important: hope. The hope that comes from knowing that, even in the darkest of times, there is always someone watching over us, a quiet presence, a gift of shadows, that reminds us to keep giving, no matter how little we have. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all.
Whispering echoes.